it's inflation, and it's sort of the drag on of inflation. It affects people. Americans in general are surly at this point, especially the younger, the less educated Blacks and Hispanic Americans. And they cite the economy and inflation as the number one issue.
You would think at some point, though, if inflation is easing, following an historic series of interest rate hikes that have created, of course, a whole different problem for consumers. If you look at mortgage rates, if you look at credit cards right now, we've seen an easing in inflation, but his numbers don't seem to be responding to that. Is there a lag effect with this economic condition?
Yeah, first and foremost, there is a lag effect. And when it comes to economics, public opinion typically is a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator. But the other issue is that it's not about rates, Joe. It's about the level of prices, and as you were saying before, things are still more expensive than a few years ago, and Americans feel the pinch. They can't make ends meet. When you look at specific demographics like younger Americans, they feel that especially so. So yes, there's a lag effect on the one hand, and it's about price levels on the other.
President talking about supply chain yesterday at this event. And they had, of all people, the Secretary of Homeland Security making media rounds to try to make the point. I know they had Pete Buttigieg, the Transportation Secretary, around the Thanksgiving holiday, and everybody gets their turn. But supply chain, Cliff, and maybe you've pulled this, is not exactly a household conversation, a kitchen table conversation. Things are either more expensive or they're not. Is the White House just reaching for the wrong narrative?
Yeah, they're trying to connect with Americans. They're trying to explain things, but in a context of that is difficult at this point. Americans are not ready to listen, right? Obviously, supply chain, talking about the supply chain is super abstract, and the average American is not going to understand what it is specifically. But more importantly, people are not willing to listen right now because they're not feeling it.
You write in your piece, what can be done? Need to be patient. The president, I guess, has time on his side here. There's another year for these numbers to improve before people vote. Defend the policy agenda, though, jumps off the page here. If he's going to get above 40% before the election, how does he do that? If it's not supply chain, is it, I feel your pain? What's the approach from the commander-in-chief?
No, I think he needs to be patient. He's going to have to wait. This inflationary inertia is going to have to work itself out in public opinion, and it will. It typically does. And he has to double down on his message, a message of economic growth, a message of economic vitality. Talk about those programs that he's initiated over the last few years. Maybe today people are not willing to listen, but that doesn't mean a half a year from now they won't be.
Is it time to drop the Bidenomics thing? Get rid of this brand?
Their branding has been suboptimal at best. They need to go and talk about the benefits and the specific, reality that people are living in. That's the best way to connect with anyone, including the American populace.
We're spending time with Cliff Young from Ipsos. Cliff, I know you had run numbers on the president's foreign policy as well, and we're seeing a lot of pushback really from progressives, and in some cases the same people who are being singled out in your new poll on inflation here. It's in many cases people with lower incomes. It's in many cases people of color who this president needs to get reelected. How much of a problem is that when you add the layer of foreign policy here with what's happening specifically between Israel and Hamas?
Yeah, foreign policy is an important issue. It's not a determinant issue when it comes to the election. Really, once again, if you put inflation versus foreign policy, inflation wins out, and that's tinged in a more negative way. If we look at Ukraine as well, there are weak numbers there. The American populace in general, when it comes to foreign policy, is more isolationist, more inward looking than, let's say, a generation or two ago. Again, the real problem with the numbers is an economic problem, or more specifically, an inflation problem.
Sure. When you add, what some people see as funding violent wars or endless wars, I guess that can have a corrosive effect. Cliff, but there's no doubt about this being an economic issue and something that voters are going to be weighing their decisions on here. I wonder if there's anything more than be patient. If you're essentially saying the president needs to wait for things to get better.
Yeah, it's the economic context. It's difficult. Obviously, They need to double down on their message. They need to be on message. What are those things that they are doing to improve people's lives, whether that be on the economic front or on the healthcare front or transportation or whatever it might be, infrastructure as an example. They need to be patient because the context is more negative at this point. What we know ultimately is that as inflation resides, the numbers probably will tick back up, not to the levels that they were before. It never improves as much as it declines. But yeah, it's a moment to be patient. And one of the points that I was making when it comes to patience is that the Democrats shouldn't overreact. Indeed, a sitting president like Biden, even with the numbers he has better than a 50-50 chance of winning the next election. Maybe it's not 80%, but it's at least 50%, 50-50, let's say. A successor could be Newsom as an example, or Harris as another one, only has about a 6 to 10% chance at the present approval ratings. So once again, be patient. Democrats, be patient. This too will pass economic context, the negative economic context. And ultimately, this is, the explanation as to Biden's numbers today.